Good afternoon. Have you ever felt like this? Well, I'm trying to give you some tips of how we can get out of this trap. Who am I? My name is Håkan Forss. I'm a Lean and Agile coach at the Vega Group in Stockholm. I've been doing this Agile stuff for some time, Scrum and XP, but for the last few years it's been more gravitating towards Kanban and Lean, because I think it's a wider concept that we can apply even outside the IT part of our value streams. I'm a passionate cyclist, if I get the time to actually do it, and I especially like going uphill. The thing that makes it going hard to go uphill is that I like barbecue. But enough about me. I will tell you a story about the Busy Bee company and the Kata company. And these guys are testers that are testing a very complex software in a very complex hardware situation as well. And let's see if you can maybe recognize yourself. So what I'm going to talk about here, you will see that we will build up what you could potentially call a value stream map. The green bricks will be the value-adding things, the things that we are asking people to actually do. The yellow ones will be non-value-adding things, but we need to do it to be able to do the green stuff, how we have set up the process. And then we have the red ones that are mostly waiting time. And in this example, we have some blue ones as well. That would be when the supporting team comes back for some information or some request to the testers. So we will start with the Busy Bee company, and they are setting up this very complex environment. They have to build up the environment, they have to load the software, get it ready to do the first test case. And they start running the test, and unfortunately, they discover a problem. So the tester takes the information they have, they write it in a bug report, submits it into some electronic system, and hope someone will pick it up and actually work on it. But when we have done that, we can't just sit idle and do nothing. So what we do is to actually switch over to the next test case. That means that we need to tear down the environment and we need to load a new piece of software. And when we are doing that, the support team coming back and say, well, we need some traces from when you execute it so we can get a more feeling for how it works, what the problem is. And the tester here says, well, I will do that as soon as I'm done with this case, the test case that I'm working on right now. So please wait, and as soon as I'm done, I will do that for you. He starts running the test case, and unfortunately, he discovers a bug in this version as well. So he files a report, and he sends off that to the support team. And then he switches back to the original test case, rebuilds the environment for the first version, and when he's doing that, the support team, another support team comes back and say, well, we need some more logs from the system to see what really happened so we can analyze the problem. And the tester says, I will get right back on that as soon as I'm done with the first test case. And then he generates some traces, sends that off to the support team, and then he moves over to rebuilding the environment again for the second test case. He runs, he gets the information back, and while he's doing that, the support team comes back with a fix. And he says, I will try that as soon as I'm done with the second test case. And he runs it, and there's still some problems, and he's sending that off to the support team. He switches back, rebuilds the environment, testing it out, and while he's doing that, the support team come back and say, well, I have a fix, can you please try it? And the tester completes the test run, and fortunately it actually works. So he's done. He switches back and he completes the second one. Do anyone here in the audience kind of recognize this situation? I get a few nods at least. Some of the companies that I work with, this is very, very common. So let's switch over to the Kata company. So they will do the similar thing. They will do the setup, it's the same. We have the same fault, so they will find the same problem, but instead of actually writing it down in an electronic system, the tester immediately goes to the support team and says, we have a problem, we have a bug here. Can you please come over and we can look at it together? But the support team is unfortunately not available. And the Kata guy, he then says, well, okay, fine. I'll ask my coach to come here and we will actually do some process improvement work while we're waiting on the support team. Because then I don't have to tear down the environment. So as soon as the support teams come back and wants to have some information, the environment is up and running and they can together sit and find out and get the additional information. And instead of moving on to the second test case, waiting for the fix, they get started on even some more process improvement work while they are waiting on the fix. And eventually, the support team comes back with the fix, and because the environment is up and running, we can immediately start to running the tests again, and we can complete them. So in this case, the first test case is already done. So then, we switch over to the second test case, and we will repeat the same pattern again. And as we can see, we have completed the first test case much earlier in the second version compared to the first, and we even completed both of the test cases faster in the second version. And the ones actually performing better in terms of the whole system here is not the ones that's keeping itself busy all the time. It's actually the Kata company that is not focusing on getting the work to a completed state instead of just keeping busy. And as Dr. Deming said, a bad system will beat a good person anytime. And in this case, people are working equally. They're putting all their efforts into it, but because of the design of how we do work, the busy bee company is actually performing worse than the Kata company. And the Kata company even have time to do process improvement. So what we really need to do is to shift focus. We need to shift our focus from focusing on the workers in the system and keeping them busy, and instead focusing on the work. It should be the work that's going, the value that we are creating for the customer that should be in our focus. So the camera should be on the work and follow the work and not the workers themselves. There's a great book called This is Lean, and written by Niklas Modig and Per Ostrom from the Swedish School of Economics. And they created this model where they talk about resource efficiency on one axle and flow efficiency on one axle. And the nirvana state of processes would be if we could have all our resources occupied all the time, and the work that we're trying to, the value that we're trying to create for our customers should be occupied all the time with no waiting. And of course, reaching nirvana is a little bit hard, right? But let's look at this. So we have the busy bee company is really up in this quadrant. They are looking at keeping the testers, in this case, occupied all the time. The test environment is occupied all the time, and the support teams is occupied all the time. But on the other side, we have the Kata company. They are focusing on the work, So the work is occupied as much as possible, but not the workers. So the Kata company is focusing on flow efficiency first, compared to the BCB company that is focusing on resource efficiency first. And these are really two different business strategies. And sometimes being resource efficient might be a good thing. If you're a steel mill and having the actual oven not be utilized all the time would be very expensive, because it's very expensive to heat up the oven. And if you need to cool it down, you have to clean it out and all that. It's very, very expensive. So in terms of economics, in this case, keeping the oven busy all the time is a good way of looking at how to operate this process. And to do that, what we need to do is to have a large amount of work waiting in front of the worker, so they will never run out of work. And we also need to have a buffer between workers or stages in our process, so the next step in the process will not run out of work. But what happened with this is that the work going through the system will actually take quite a bit of time. But if you look at another business way of running your business would be the emergency services. How do we want the emergency services to behave? We typically want them to be responsive more than just being occupied, right? We don't want the emergency service to say, well, I'm busy taking care of something else, so you have to wait, and your house burns down. So what we typically want to do is to have a more focus on being available when there's some demand. So setting up that system would be, we would try to avoid to have a queue of work in front of the worker, and we also try to avoid to have a queue of work between the workers. And Lean is really about a business philosophy where we try to focus on flow efficiency first before we try to move up towards high resource efficiency. Because this is typically much, much easier than moving from a high resource efficiency towards high flow efficiency. So how do we do this? Well, we need to shift our focus. We need to plan for less than 100% utilization of people and resources in our organization. So what we need to do is to plan the utilization of high priority work should be less than 100%. And maybe a rule of thumb would be something like 70%, depending on the variation that you have in the system. And this really acts as an insurance policy for shorter lead times. But it also creates options, because if you're not scheduled to work on most important things all the time, if something more important arrives, you can switch over and start working on that. So it gives you options to do the important stuff as you need it. And reducing the utilization also helps us in terms of handling variation. In this work that we do, software development or other product development, it's quite hard to know exactly how long a piece of work will take in one part of the process. And we don't all the time know the arrival rate of work. So what we can do by actually lowering the amount of things that we have planned in the system, we can handle this variation and make things flow evenly through the system. But the most important part, as I see it, is that we create space for improvements. If we don't schedule up to 100%, we create the space to do process improvement so we can grow the capacity in the system. And combining this, you will have something like this. As you lower the utilization rate, the planned utilization rate in the system, you can handle the variation, and you also have time to do innovation and improvement work. Another thing that we can do that comes from a flow-based system, and usually used in Kanban implementations, is that we will shift the focus of how we run our meetings. So a typical Scrum meeting, we will gather around the board and we will focus on who is working on what did you do yesterday, what should you do today, and maybe we discuss blockers. In a flow-based way of running these kind of meetings, you will typically you will try to visualize the whole process, the steps that you have. And the second thing you will do is to focus on the blockers. What is stopping you from progressing? And you are focusing next on what you can finish today. So a typical meeting in front of a flow-based board or a Kanban board would look something like that we will start typically from the right, and we go upstream. So we focus on the things that we want to have as close as possible to being at the complete state. The next thing we will focus on would be the blockers. What is stopping us from actually delivering what we have planned to do? So what are the things that are creating delay in our system? Then, if we have time, we will focus on things that, what can we complete today? How can we move this thing from analysis to development today? How can we set up the system so that will happen? And last, and typically that, if we have the time, we might start to reason about the things that we want to pull in next. But we're shifting the focus from looking at tasks and the workers more towards how can we complete the work and the value that we are creating for the customers. And connected to this is to shift your focus around blockers and impediments. So if you're tracking your impediments on your boards, what would you do with the blocker stickers or indication of impediments? How do you do that today? When it's resolved, what do you do with the stickers? You throw it away? It's solved, it's all done? If you do that, you're missing something. If we instead take those blockers and we put them on a board of what the blockers and what the impediments has been, and you can build a Pareto diagram like this, you have a great opportunity to find out what are the delays caused in your system, so you can start to address them. And then focusing on the things that are causing the most delay. And this is a simple just the count, the count of the blockers. But a team that I work with, they're actually positioning the sticky notes here based on time. So instead of just saying the count, they are actually, the distance between the notes would be the time incurred by the blockage. And that way we can very easily see what is causing the most delay in the system. So you should really see the blockers and impediments as the gold and the gems in your system, because they are the opportunities to improve the flow of your system. Sorry, I probably need to get some water. I will mute. Are we back? Yes. So the next thing I will talk about is the work in process, WIP. And I will talk about the thing that I think is kind of the hidden side of WIP limits. So WIP limits will help you, limiting WIP in your system will typically help you increase flow in the system. But I think the even more important part, the ones that is actually below the surface, that we don't talk about that much, is how we can improve the system. So imagine yourself going to a canal, and we come to the canal, and we are looking at the stream of water, and it's streaming quite fine. We don't see any big disturbances in the flow. But what would happen if you start to lower the water level? Maybe you see some turbulence and you actually see a big rock. And if we lower the water level even more, we will see that the turbulence and the rocks are actually impeding flow quite a bit. So by lowering the water level in the system, by lowering the amount of things that you have ongoing, will help you to see the things that are creating the blockage in the flow. So by lowering the WIP limit, you typically will get more pink stickers, blockers, and impediments that you can start to address. So if you are drying up in terms of pink stickers in your process when you do improvements, try to lower the WIP limit even more, because then you will see even more problems. So lowering the water level in the system uncovers process improvement opportunities. So how do we set WIP limits then? Well, you can see this as a way of organizational friction. How much friction do we want to put on the organization? So if you want to have low friction on the current system, well, then maybe you set a WIP limit on the average WIP that you have in the system today at 2, because you just set it there. That means that it's very, very rare that you will hit the WIP limit. So you can still operate your process just like you do today, and it's very rare that you will hit the WIP limit. If you want to create high friction in the system, you could typically set it to half the amount of workers that you have in the system, because then it forces you to have pairing and things like that you may be not doing today. But that will create more friction on the organization. But this is only the first step. And where you kind of get started is based on how much capital do you have to implement this in your organization. But the next step is really the important part, is that on a regular basis, we should adjust our WIP limit to create more learning. So Don Reinerson talks about this. He says you should, on a regular basis, maybe monthly, bi-monthly, you will adjust your WIP limit by 20 to 30%. And that could be both up and down to create some new learning, but typically you will start to move it downwards. And when you do this, new problems, new process problems will pop up, and they will be evident for you. And if nothing pops up, there's nothing to resolve, but if you find problems, you start to resolving them. And when the root cause of these problems are removed, the process should stabilize, and you are able to operate at that new level, and then you just go back and repeat. And this way, you can start to really learn about your system and how you can improve the flow of work going through the system. What are the things that are stopping you from having a good and even flow through the system? So flow thinking for me, it's thinking in terms of flow efficiency first before we start to raise the resource efficiency. So we need to focus on the work, not the workers. And we don't plan for 100% utilization. It should be far less. And we should really think about blockers and impediments as great opportunities to find out what is the problems caused in the system so we can fix them. And limiting WIP is really about learning. It will help you manage the flow, but it's the learning side that is even more important. And many of the tools in the Lean community might look to be something above the waterline, but is something else if you really look below the waterline. So we have a Kanban system with limited WIP, but we also have other things like Heijunka, kind of even out the flow in the system, that is really about trying to understand how the system works. So the question to you, how do you want to operate your processes? Do you want to operate in the high resource efficiency side first? Or do you want to operate in the high flow efficiency side first. And with that, thank you so much.